In order to complement the data that I talked about with Catholic schools in particular, here are some recent data about private schools that you might find interesting. So what do federal data tell us about private schools? Well, there are 58 million students, 10.25% of all pre-K through 12 students in the US. In the private school community, 36% Catholic, 39% other religiously affiliated. Most of those would be non-sectarian Christian academies, and 24% non-sectarian. The percentage of Catholic schools as within the whole private school community has gone down considerably. For a long time, it was well over 50%. Of private schools in the US, 50% are elementary schools alone, 67% Catholic schools, 13% are secondary, as opposed to 25% Catholic. 36% are combined, which is much more frequent, 8% only in the Catholic world. So this is a distribution of race by type of school, and you can see that if you look to the left, the column, that 66% of kids in Catholic schools are white, non-Hispanic, and that is the red number above, 50%, is for all public schools. 8% black among Catholics in Catholic schools, 16% in public schools. 16% of kids in Catholic schools are Hispanic, 25% of kids in public schools, and the same percentage of Asian, and you can see the others. So in some ways, I think, as mentioned, when you look at the demographic changes, clearly outreach to Latinos has to be a very high priority. So here are some characteristics of the private schools. So there we are in the fall of 2015, short of 35,000 private elementary and secondary schools with 480,000 or so FTE teachers. 68% of private schools emphasized a regular elementary and or secondary program. And you can see 10% Montessori, 10% early childhood, 5% special ed, 3% special program or alternative program. More private school students were enrolled in schools located in cities. They tend to be heavily urban, especially the Catholic schools, followed by those enrolled in suburban schools, rural areas, and then those in towns. Most private school students in 2015-16 were enrolled in kindergarten than in any other grade level, and that probably also holds true for Catholic school subset. The average school size was 142 across all private schools, which differed by instructional level. So on average, private elementary schools had 100 students, secondary schools had 263 students, and combined schools, remember there aren't many of them in the Catholic world, had 199 students. So in general, compared to other private schools, Catholic schools tend to be considerably larger. 46% of all private schools in the 2015-16 year enrolled fewer than 50 students. And many of these, I think, are, again, kind of Christian academies with very low salaries, etc. Okay. So of the 69%, we already looked at some of those figures in the chart that I showed you earlier. Okay, 96% of all private schools were coeducational, 2% all girls, 2% all boys. So really it's a tiny number, and I would venture that a large percentage of that is made up of Catholic schools. The average pupil-teacher ratio was 10.2. Pupil-teacher ratio 11.1 in secondary, 10.1 elementary, so that is not surprising. 78% of private school teachers were full-time, 5% at least three-quarter time, 9% at least half-time, so very few teachers, less than half-time. Just thought this would be a helpful thing when you think about teachers and teaching staff. Now these are for 2015-16, average base salary for full-time teachers in public elementary and secondary schools. So you can see a starting salary 1 year or less, 41,600, and this is across the nation. So as you know, public school districts differ widely, as does cost of living. But I think when you think about the schools, Catholic schools with which you are familiar, you can see that truism that Catholic school teachers are paid less, in fact, is the case. Hope that this was helpful when you look at the issues related to quality, that of the private high school graduates in 14-15, 65% attended four-year colleges, which is much higher than the national average. And likewise, you can see that private schools tend to be clustered in California, Florida, Illinois, New York, Pennsylvania, and Texas. Again, no surprise. Hope this was helpful. And also now, when we look at the issue of cost, and you remember in the previous presentation that I did, I talked about return on investment, I talked about debt, I talked about sticker shock. Well, this is a recent article about elite colleges, and it shows what I mentioned in terms of the discount rate and how much people actually pay to go to a private elite college. Kind of interesting, isn't it, that really the amount, what, 70K, very affluent, but poor families, something like 6,000, affluent families, 69,000. So you can see that the sticker shock issue is an important one in private higher ed, and it should also be an important part of marketing and strategic planning in Catholic elementary and secondary schools. So they break down here 6 levels of affluence. So by income, home equity, cash, investments, and percentile issues. Any of you who've dealt with FACTS or FACTS, which is the tuition collection, or any kind of financial aid issues, you can see these levels that, of course, you know, income is only one indicator, and income, especially for poor people, not only is it low, but there aren't other sources like investments and home equity. So I think that's helpful. Now, here to take a look at how people pay by family profile. Again, think back. These are the criteria that they're using, and you can see that the poorer you are, the more financial aid you have, the more loans and jobs. So I hope this is helpful as you think about planning and some of the finances and some of the numbers of the broader private school world, both elementary, secondary, and higher ed. Now, this is not a federal study, but it is also a very, very recent study that, at least to make you aware of, the Fordham, not university, but the Fordham Foundation did a study of self-discipline in Catholic schools. And they had 2 reputable scholars who looked at federal data, did a secondary analysis of federal data on children who entered kindergarten and to year 2. And this looks at their behavior. So students in Catholic schools less likely to act out or be disruptive than those in other private or public schools. They exhibited fewer externalizing behaviors, demonstrated more self-discipline than matched peers in other private schools. Students in Catholic schools exhibit more self-control. Teachers at every grade level, or students in the first cohort who attended Catholic schools exhibited greater self-control. They were more likely to control their temper, respect others' property, accept fellow students' ideas, handle peer pressure. Like the difference in externalizing behavior, Catholic school students who entered kindergarten exhibited more, again, this question of self-control. So regardless of demographics, as you can see, self-discipline issues, and of course, also you say, well, is this a Catholic school effect, or is it an effect of 2-parent families, or a certain socioeconomic status, or location of where the child lives? So they really accounted for all of that and say, at least there's some evidence that attending a Catholic school may benefit all sorts of children, at least when it comes to reducing the frequency of externalizing behavior and fostering greater self-control, which is, of course, an important lesson, not just for school, but it's an important lesson for life. This study, by the way, was written up in an editorial in the Wall Street Journal last week. The authors conclude, don't underestimate the power of religion to positively influence a child's behavior. And now they talk about in the absence of it, etc. So the important centrality of Judeo-Christian values: humility, obedience, kindness, tolerance, self-sacrifice, and perseverance. So many of the interesting, in our previous conversation about charter schools, many of them would say, yeah, we're not religious, but we have values like humility, obedience, kindness, tolerance, self-sacrifice, and perseverance. So this is kind of good news. I hope you find it interesting. And again, another window into the private school world in which you are doing planning and change. Now, I want to show you a video that comes from the National Assessment of Educational Progress.
The core of the value of private school is to provide that individualized instruction. They're learning in a smaller environment with smaller groups of people. It's almost like a family, more so a family.
We're talking about testing. We don't test as frequently as is required in the public schools.
We believe in a progressive type of education, which is focused on experiential learning.
The flexibility we have in curriculum, the way we're allowed to teach, the way we relate to kids, is much different than in the public schools. Not better or worse, just different.
The reality is that children in private schools are an essential element of American education. They're part of the American family, and you cannot have a comprehensive picture of education in this country without including those students. NAEP is the gold standard when it comes to providing a comprehensive picture of student achievement in the United States.
It tells a story. Like all assessments, it tells a story.
We know that our teachers and our parents want to have a tangible way of looking at the progress that their students are making, and so we know that standardized tests are important.
And I think that it's important for private schools to be included in what's going on nationally. I think peers are hungry for it. They want to know how our children are doing with other children across the nation.
I think it's important for private schools to participate in NAEP because it gives students an opportunity to participate in a national assessment.
Another reason that private schools should probably participate in NAEP is because you want valid results. And if you're leaving out a population, you're not really getting valid results.
If all you did was private schools, you wouldn't have a very good sampling. If all you did was public schools or suburban schools or urban schools, you wouldn't have a full sampling. If it's a national report card, it's nice to be part of the discussion.
We want to teach kids to be responsible as citizens. And I think that this was a great way for my students to feel that they're a part of something that's bigger than themselves.
Why not participate? Why not be a part of making a difference in the educational system of the future?
If students understand that the NAEP assessment doesn't really single them out, because their own individual scores wouldn't be reported, it would put them at ease to just go ahead and do their best.
My students knew that they would learn from this assessment, and they were excited to do it.
Our students do not miss a lot of class time.
It was respectful of our academic day. It was respectful of the teachers' need to make sure that the test went on and finished in a timely manner.
It really was not a big deal at all. The whole process was really pretty easy and smooth.
You want to be part of that type of assessment because you represent a very unique aspect of the educational experience here in the U.S.
Policymakers can't make good choices and good decisions unless they have good information.
I think participating in NAEP helps us shape the future of America. What better way to make a difference in our educational system than to take the time now to be evaluated so that we can make it better?
So remember, NAEP is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. I represent the private school community and that governing board. And so, hope this is helpful.
I have no idea. Can I get a hint?
I'm not the best test taker. Depends on the type of test.
Preparing for them is not